This is a UNCG Pedagogical Poetry Society video, and I'm Kathy Goodkin. Today we're going to be talking about elegies. I'll begin with a definition and a very brief history of elegy, and then provide some practical examples of how you can teach elegy in your classroom. In a broad survey of poetry from the very earliest recorded verse to the present day, elegy is among the most popular and persistent genres. In the simplest definition, an elegy is a poem of mourning. Traditionally, this often meant mourning for a person or a group of people who had died. Broadly, however, elegies can also mourn changes or losses that are more abstract, such as a loss of faith, a loss of culture, a loss of place, or a general existential grief. Loss is a universal component of the human experience, so it makes sense that elegies have persisted throughout poetry. It may be helpful to think of the elegy as belonging to a broader category of poetry called occasional poetry. These are poetic genres or forms that respond to specific kinds of occasions, such as a birth or a marriage. And many of these common life events have associated poetic forms. For example, an occasional poem that celebrates a marriage is called an epithalamium. The elegy originates in ancient Greek poetry, where the word comes from the ancient Greek for funeral lament. In their original incarnation, elegies were composed using a specific meter and line length, and any poem following this particular form could be considered an elegy, regardless of content. In contemporary poetry, however, the form of an elegy ranges much more widely, and the content is always related to grief or loss. One traditional structure for the elegy is a three-part approach, in which the first part of the poem laments the death or loss, the second part praises and memorializes the lost person, place, or thing, and the third part provides comfort to those mourning or works toward a sense of resolution. Contemporary elegies don't necessarily follow this exact progression, however, there are echoes of this emotional arc in many elegiac poems. Because of how common and persistent the genre is, you may find you need to teach an elegy as a part of any period of literature. They are present in the more widely taught body of literature, often called the canon, and also in less commonly taught corners of the literary world, across time and space. In this second section of the video, I will offer strategies for teaching elegy that will help students enter and productively engage with these sometimes emotionally challenging poems. Teaching elegy as a poetic genre may seem daunting at first. It can be hard to confront loss and sorrow, especially in a classroom setting. It may be helpful to set the stage for your students by reminding them that art often creates the space for us to grapple with difficult elements of the human experience. One way to demonstrate this is to show your students how very common the elegy is. You can do this quickly by asking them to search the Poetry Foundation website for the word elegy, or by demonstrating this search in class if you have the technology available. This search alone brings up hundreds of results, ranging in time from the 17th century to the present day. By contextualizing the genre as an essential and ongoing part of the way we process and reflect on grief, you may ease the transition into the poem's content. This next strategy provides an entry point to teaching a specific elegy of your choice. You can use this strategy with canonical elegies, like Walt Whitman's elegy for President Lincoln, When Lilacs Last and the Dooryard Bloomed, or contemporary elegies, of which there are many, many examples. Because elegies are, by definition, poems driven by the emotions associated with grief and mourning, try making a line-by-line, stanza-by-stanza, or section-by-section map of the poem's emotional tone. What you are really doing here is modeling how to use close reading to discern the way diction, syntax, image, and other elements of the poem connote emotion, and demonstrating how paying attention to these elements can help the reader open the poem to meaning-making. Some elegies are more direct than others in this regard, so you will want to visit or revisit the concept of connotation here. This will help you show students how particular words or phrases can connote an emotional state. For example, let's look at the opening lines of Milton's Lycidas. In these lines, even before the speaker mentions the sad occasion, his words and images connote a sense of intense emotion that we might associate with grief or even anger. We see myrtles brown, harsh, crude, bitter. Demonstrating this kind of reading for students will help them learn and practice essential and transferable skills for reading poetry, and also show them the importance of observing a speaker's emotional trajectory in an elegy. If you haven't introduced elegiac form using the traditional three-part model I mentioned in the first part of this video, you can ask students to consider whether the poem you have emotionally mapped conforms to that progression or subverts it. You can scale this strategy up or down depending on the amount of class time you want to devote to a particular poem. You can invite the class's participation as you make your emotional map, or assign them to make the map ahead of time as homework by asking them to highlight words and phrases that convey the emotional tone. You can make your own emotional map autonomously and show the class what it looks like, and use that as a tool for lecture or discussion. Another entry point for teaching an elegy is to focus on who or what is being mourned and memorialized. This strategy can be especially interesting when the person, place, or thing is not as clearly indicated. Let's look at an example, the poem Elegy by Barot. There is a mystery in this poem. Though we know it's an elegy, it's called Elegy, unlike Lycidas, the speaker doesn't name the loss concretely. Instead, we have images that hint at a loss or the aftermath of a painful event. People telling anecdotes in the rain, an upside-down car. When you approach a poem like this, beginning your class by asking the students to consider who or what is being elegized in the poem, and asking them to support their statements using details from the poem can provide a way in to discussion. Or you can use this question as the starting point for a lecture in which you demonstrate how a reader might move from a place of mystery to one of understanding when confronted with a poem in which the loss is not concrete and clear. Thank you for watching this video. I hope you have found our brief overview of teaching the elegy helpful. You can find some poems that may be useful for teaching elegy linked in the description of this video, as well as some of the sources that we used.